This is a dream come true for me. The great challenge that I have and a great opportunity. It means a lot to me to be a Husker.
Nebraska Volleyball can change your life.
For 25 years, John Cook built a dynasty at Nebraska. Now in retirement, he begins a new journey, trading the volleyball court for the open range. But before he rides off into the sunset, he sits down with us for one last ride.
The Last Ride with John Cook is brought to you in part by Phelps Memorial Health Center.
So let's start at the beginning then. I haven't heard you talk much about your family life when you were young. I mean, I know you grew up on a lemon ranch in Chula Vista. Kind of take me back to what that was like, when you were young.
Chula Vista was a small little town south of San Diego, and we had plenty of places to roam. My dad raced motorcycles, and so we just kind of were all over. We'd go down to Mexico fishing. We'd go to the desert camping. But really, one of the main influences in my life was my great-grandmother, and her name was Hazel Goes Cook. During the Depression, her and another lady made soup and took it around to the schools to feed the kids. And 50 years later, she was honored by President Nixon and actually has an elementary school named after her. So that's where my roots started, I think, in coaching and teaching, was the influence from her. When I got involved in sports in 9th grade, that's kind of when my life changed, and I started seeing a purpose of school mattered and sports mattered. And ironically, my dad, who did all kinds of odd jobs, he got hired at a company called Stanley Andrews Sporting Goods. And he was one of the first team reps to go around the schools in San Diego to sell uniforms, equipment, back then salt tablets, things like that. So I kind of went from this, lemon ranch deal to be getting involved in sports, and then my dad getting involved in sports. And I think that's where this all really started.
And then you went to a very prestigious private school, Francis Parker. What was you were the high school quarterback.
Yeah.
Talk about that experience.
My senior year, I wanted to go to college, and I had coaches encouraging me to go. In my junior year, I failed the SAT test, and I failed the English version of it. So my dad transferred me in my senior year to Francis Parker. An English teacher tutored me so I could pass that test. And of course, Francis Parker's a college prep school, so they prepared me to go to college, and I ended up being able to go to college and play sports. I credit those coaches and those teachers, and it was this lady named Judy Corbin was the English teacher, and I had an extra class on her prep period. She would tutor me. And when I wrote my book, because I wanted to write a book to prove I wasn't a dummy, and Coach Osborne helped me with it, get it started, but I sent her the first copy. She retired in Michigan. I sent her the first copy, and if it wasn't for her, who knows where I would have ended up. But that's when I knew I wanted to be a coach and a teacher.
So then you go on to play basketball at San Diego. So tell me about that choice.
I really wanted to play football, but I got a better scholarship to play basketball. And at the time, University of San Diego was Division II, so I was a forward. And then my junior year, they went Division I. And Jim Bervelli was the coach. my junior year, he says, "Hey, John, we're going to bring in a lot of bigger guys now. We're Division I. We're going to add 6 new guys. So I don't know how much you're going to play unless you can move to guard." And I was a forward. So that's when I started coaching, and I got a job at Coronado High School coaching football as an assistant coach while I was still in college.
So you're on this path. And then 1980, you take this hike up to Cascade Falls.
Yeah.
And the fall happens. Just walk me through that entire event.
Wendy and I were dating at the time. We went up to Lake Tahoe to play in a beach volleyball tournament, a mixed tournament. And my brother and his girlfriend went. We decided to go on this hike up around Cascade Lake and up in what's called Desolation Wilderness. So we take off and hike, and then we go way up in there. It's called Desolation Wilderness for a reason. I mean, there's nothing up there. It's big mountains. So we all hike up there. We're doing great. And then we're coming back down. It's getting close to dusk, and we're at the top of this waterfall. And then my brother and I get the idea we're going to roll some boulders off the top of this waterfall. Next thing I know, I push this boulder off. I stand up. I'm lightheaded and fell over backwards and went off. And then from there, the story just becomes unbelievable. I went down this cliff about 100 feet. And so I landed on a rock in some bushes. So that's probably what saved me. And I hit a ledge on the way down. And I was wearing a Herman Joseph hat. It was on the cliff, or the part I hit coming down this ledge. It was actually, I hit it and my hat fell off and it stayed on the ledge. But I continued down. My brother got down to me. I'm hanging upside down. And I told him, I said, "Okay," I think I knocked some tooth loose, but my jaw was broken. And I said, "I think I hurt my hip." Well, I had a compound fracture of my femur. So he sees all this. He gets underneath me and he sets me on his legs and he plants into the side of the hill to prop me up because I'm bleeding and I'm having a hard time breathing. But I was conscious enough to tell him what was going on. So that was the first big break. The next miracle that happened was Dr. Stedman was on call that night. He's probably the most famous orthopedic surgeon in the history of the United States. He goes, "Okay, here's what's going on here." He says, "We're going to clean this out, the compound fracture." And he says, "It's going to hurt. We're going to put it in traction." So they drilled a hole through my shin bone to attach the weights to and pulled my leg in traction. I'm thinking I'm going to be out in a few days, head home. I mean, that's literally my mindset. So we get all that done, and then he comes in a few days later and he says, "Okay, traction's looking good. Everything's looking good. We think we got, no infection or anything." He goes, we're gonna keep you here for about 9 weeks." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, you're going to be in traction for 9 weeks for this thing to heal up. Then you're going to go into a body cast for 3 months." And I completely lost my mind. They put me in a body cast, sent me home, and then the long road of recovery started. And so one of the great things about that is, as a coach, I was able to really appreciate what athletes go through, and especially when they're injured in recovery. And so I've always had this, I think, a great connection and a way to instill a mindset in athletes when they're coming back from those types of things. Because, you go through it, you understand it.
Why did you go back?
So this is even more crazy. So I'm in the hospital. This is like week 3 or 4. I get a roommate, and he got his knee done by Dr. Stedman. And so he's a rock climber. So I'm telling him about all this. So next thing I know, he gets out, and like a week or 2 later, he comes back with a Herman Joseph hat. He crawled up there and got it. And anyway, it's just, so at some point I knew, and it was about a year or 2 later, I had to go back up there, and I got my brother. We went back up. I think Wendy went with us, and I had to go back up there and stand up there and look down at, just to it was a mental thing I had to get through, that I could do that.
So you come out of that and you get an offer to go back to Francis Parker to be a head coach. But the only thing they have is 3 girls sports that you're going to coach. Is that right?
I wanted to go back and coach football. And I actually had job offers at some really good schools, but no full-time teaching jobs. And I had done part of my stint of student teaching because I was at University of San Diego. Francis Parker's just a mile away. So part of my student teaching was at Francis Parker. So they called me and said, hey, we got a history opening, geography, and we're going to give you an apartment. And I'm like, in San Diego at that time, and we had just gotten married, apartment was a huge deal. I said, we'll take it. And I said, but what am I going to coach in football? They go, you're going to coach girls sports. Because it was Title IX in the 80s in San Diego, and girls sports were just starting. So the first sport was volleyball. And I knew a little bit because Wendy played, so I watched, but I really didn't pay attention and understand the rules. And they said girls volleyball. And so I got a book, read the rules, went to a couple other coaches' practices, and then I just coached them like football players.
But you had some level of comfort, right? Because Wendy played.
Yeah.
And so you at least had a sounding board when you went home to at least start to learn how to coach in the sport, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Probably at the time she probably didn't think I knew what I was doing.
So you knew nothing about coaching volleyball, but you go 162-18 in your career there, 90% winning percentage, win a couple of state titles. Looking back, how do you explain that success so early?
I set a standard for them to try to hit, and we worked really hard. And I think once they tasted some success, they wanted more. The disadvantage we had in San Diego at the time, there was no club programs. LA and San Francisco had club programs. So we knew we had to work hard.
Let's fast forward to 1984. 84, you're an assistant, right, at UCSD. Was it at that point, or at what point did you begin to see yourself as a volleyball coach and not as a football coach coaching volleyball?
I always in the back of my mind had I wanted to get back into football. So when I took the assistant job at UCSD, I just wanted to, how can I get better as a coach coaching volleyball? And so they practice at night. So I coached my Parker team, and then I would go to that practice at night. We ended up runner-up and then won a national championship as Division III. And coincidentally, at the time, our Parker team, 85, we won our first state championship. So it was just a way I was pushing myself to coach. It was hard because the time commitment, but it was the only way I was going to get better. So I was doing that, and then started this club program that just exploded. And in 1988, when I had 10 Division I athletes. They all went to Stanford, USC, UCLA, and that's when I met Coach Pettit, because he was out in spring break, and we played golf, and he saw these athletes we had, and he tried to recruit them, but those kids had no idea where Nebraska was, and that's when he offered me an assistant job to come back. I came back, worked camps in July, and there was no air conditioning in the Coliseum, and our office was the equipment closet. And they put up a mini air conditioner in there. And I remember I'd have to go in there and stand in front of that thing because I thought I was going to pass out in the Coliseum. I was not used to the heat and humidity, and it was brutal. And I thought, these kids are so tough. California kids would never be able to go to do a camp all day long in this heat. Oh. And I'm like, these kids are tough here.
So that starts the 3-year stint with Terry as his assistant.
Yeah.
What was your biggest takeaway from those 3 years as an assistant under Pettit?
Probably the biggest takeaway was training these great athletes who were not great volleyball players, but training them. And he kind of turned me loose. Like, I want you to bring what you learned in California with their style of play, with the ball control and finesse and understanding the game. I want you to bring that to our program, to add to these athletes and the training that he was doing. And all of a sudden, we were competing with the best. And I think the other thing I learned from him was just how do you run a program and how do you promote and how do we sell tickets? And, he was a genius at that. And he was a very forward-thinking coach. Like, I'm not here just to coach volleyball. And many of the great coaches, that's all, they just cared about their volleyball team. He cared about the sport and promoting the sport and promoting Nebraska volleyball.
So then you get the job at Wisconsin. How did that happen?
I got a call from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona to interview. I was ready to interview with Michigan, but the women's assistant, he took that job. Christmas Eve I can't remember who called first. It was Wisconsin and Arizona. They called me and offered me the job. 45 minutes later, the other school called and offered me the job. So now Wendy and I are sitting there on Christmas Eve. Okay, where do we want to go? Wendy said, she said, listen, I'm not raising my kids in the desert. I want a 2-story house with a big lawn and a big tree. So we're going to Wisconsin. And we took the Wisconsin job.
We got in the top 10 last year and couldn't stay there. Are we a legit top 10 team? And that's what we're going to find out.
You hone your craft at Wisconsin, and then you have another meeting at the AVCA with Terry Pettit. Tell me about that meeting.
In 1998, so this has been in December, we came back to Lincoln to play in the regionals. So the first round we played Santa Barbara. So we win that match. Luckily, I think 15-13. And our best outside hitter blew out her ankle. So I'm thinking, okay, we don't have a chance. But so we played the next night against Nebraska in the Coliseum. And I've confirmed this with several people, and I'll confirm it myself. It's the loudest anybody ever heard the Coliseum. We get to the fifth, we lose 15-13 in the fifth. So I'm like crushed. Pettit's relieved. So they're going to go to the Final Four. And so that night he says, hey, meet Ann and I. So we go there and we're just talking and having something to eat. And he goes, hey, I'm going to retire. I want you to come back. Here's my plan. Come back, be the associate head coach for a year, and then it's yours. We'll give you a contract. We'll pay you a head coach salary. We've already got all this worked out with our AD, Bill Byrne at the time. And I'm like, oh, yeah, right. I've heard this before, right? Sure. And then Ann, his wife, says, no, this is for real. And she was like super serious. And I'm like, whoa. So Wendy and I go back to Wisconsin and we talk about it. And I'm thinking, okay, I just got this team to a regional final. We're a top 5 team in the country. We're returning everybody. And I've just built this program. I don't know if I want to leave. I think we went several weeks thinking about it. And so finally, Bill Burns calls me and sends me the contract. And I think this was in March. And he says, okay, we're ready to go. And here's your salary. And we got it approved and let's do it. And I said, well, I got to think about it. At the time at Wisconsin, several things happened, but I had an athletic director. I met with him the day they hired me. I never saw him again or talked to him for 7 years. So I went in, said, hey, here's what's happening. He goes, yeah, I already know. Bill Byrne already called me. He goes, we're not even going to come close to that. We're not going to match it. I said, are you serious? And he goes, we can't come close. I got up, walked out, went home, said, Wendy, we're leaving. So, I mean, it happened like that.
There's one that we couldn't pass up. Ladies and gentlemen, the head volleyball coach of the University of Nebraska, John Cook. Please stand.
Let's give John a hand.
This is a great lesson for coaches, and because I think one of the number one things when you're a coach is having an athletic director that believes in you and supports you. And I never felt that at Wisconsin. And Bill Byrne, the first time I met him when I got there, I met with him in his office. It was kind of, we really didn't need to interview or anything, but it was just like, he said, John, you can ask me for anything and I'll never say no. Now, we may not be able to do it, but we're going to try. He says, you ask me for anything that you need. And I thought, okay, this AD's got my back. And that's when I knew it was the right decision. And anyway, took off from there.
So it might have been easy because of the reaction from the AD, but I know it was really difficult because of the players you recruited. And one player in particular that you had to shake hands with in 2000 after a national championship. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it was Teresa Livingston. She came to Wisconsin, and I coached her for a couple years. She ended up being an All-American, great player. And so when I met with the team, she said she wanted to meet with me after. And I can still remember the look in her eye of the abandonment. You're leaving me. I can't believe this is happening. And it really stuck with me. And I really wanted to bring her to Nebraska. But for the record, Coach Pettit said, no, we're not going to go there because he didn't want to have bad blood and like we're stealing players. And back then there was a kind of a code you lived by. There's no code anymore. So that was really tough. And I tried to explain that to her. But she went on, and of course we played in them in 2000 for the national championship. And afterward, she would not shake my hand. And I tried to find her, but I kept working at it and built a relation and followed her. And she played pro for 9 years, maybe even longer. And finally, I heard she was getting ready to be done with pros. And I got her to come back and be a volunteer assistant for a year. That was the hardest thing ever. And I can still remember the look on her face. It was like you just let your child down. And so, yeah, that was really the hard part of it.
So Terry hands you a pretty talented team in 2000. What were your expectations of that team?
Well, it was a talented team, but we had people in different spots than what I envisioned. And we also had the lowest preseason ranking at number 12 in the history of Nebraska Volleyball. So when that came out...
How do you remember that?
Because that's something that you don't forget. First of all, I got this team. I'm the new head coach. And they have doubts, and I moved players. We're the lowest preseason ranking ever, but I had to make a statement when that came out. Of course, I get asked that at a press conference, and I said, well, if there's 11 teams better than us, it's going to be a hell of a year in college volleyball. And at the time, I didn't realize the impact that would have on our current players, but what the message I sent to them is, I think we're going to be pretty dang good. It went a long way, and that team went undefeated and won the national championship.
Gracia Lee. I mean, she's a player who sometimes gets forgotten, but she meant so much to that 2000 team.
Yeah, she was one of the, she was a 6'2", great athlete. Wasn't the greatest setter, but she was so dominant at the net with attack and taking ball. We passed the ball high and up to the net just 'cause she can go up there and grab it and do something with it. Great blocker. She was able to lead that team. And that summer before that season, we took the team to China, and we were the first team to go to China. And Gracia, who's very quiet, we're in the South China Sea at the last day of our trip, and she stands up at dinner and she goes, I got something to say. And she goes, we're going to win the national championship. So, man, there's your setter has that much confidence.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Did you give any thought to the expectations that you had set at that time after the 2000 year? After you win the national title?
I remember that the next year, I think it was the next year, we lost to Georgia Tech. I remember I couldn't handle it. We lost this, I don't know if they were ranked. I don't think they were ranked. They kicked our butt in the Coliseum. And I remember I was shaking, I couldn't handle it because how could we lose to this team? And I think we lost to some other teams that year, but that's when you start feeling pressure. And, I don't care what level you're at, what sport you're playing, but when you have a lot of success or you even go undefeated and win a national championship, everybody thinks you're going to do that every year. I thought we were going to do it every year. And then reality hits, and that's when pressure takes over of the pressure of expectation. And then you push harder and you raise the expectations even higher. We got to work harder. We got to do this, that, and it suffocates you. So I had to work through a couple years of how to be a better coach handling the expectations. And that's the hardest thing at coaching Nebraska volleyball. And it was for football for a while, and it chewed coaches up. And that was the hardest thing, was how do we manage these expectations every year and still keep it fun and not crush these players?
Now Pavin. Sarah Pavin with another kill. Sarah Pavin, Jordan Larson, national title game with Busboom as the setter. That was a tough loss. And it was to Washington.
Yeah. First of all, Washington was a great team, and they had the it. And Courtney Thompson was their setter, you spend 2 minutes with Courtney, you know why they had the it. We had this great team, great talent, and a great system that we developed, and we were crushing teams. And we crushed everybody in the semifinals, and we lost 3-0. It wasn't even close.
Yeah. So knowing that the Final Four was in Omaha the next year, you make some big changes.
Yeah.
Right? You change setter, you move Busboom to DS. We kind of heard that story,
Yeah.
but walk me through your thought process after that disappointment, knowing the Final Four is going to be in Omaha in 06.
Yeah. So we get back from January, and our libero left and transferred back closer to home. I've got Danny, who's this great athlete. Maybe we could make her the libero, and we'll run a 5-1 with Rachel. So we get back in January, 18th, whatever it is. I called Danny in. I said, Danny, we're going to move you to libero. We don't have a libero. We think you can do it. Of course, she's not happy. The story goes, she gets up, tells me something, flips me the bird, basically, and leaves. So I'm like, well, that didn't go very well. I call her mom because we haven't seen her. She said, hey, she'll be in your office today. Just be ready. So I'm thinking she's coming in to quit. She comes in with a letter, and basically she reads me this letter, and it's about she's going to be a great teammate. She's going to do whatever she wants and the team needs. And that's one of the reasons why they elected her captain.
Did you realize what you had in Jordan at the time?
Yeah, we knew Jordan was special in 8th grade. I had news people covering, go cover her high school when she played in high school, and they would come up to me like, her just sounds different when she hits the ball. And then I remember, and I've run into so many people in small town Nebraska in that area that she played, all those schools, and they all tell me, these are moms now, kids coming to camp and stuff, and yeah, we played against Jordan Larson, and we did this when she spiked. And seriously, that was the level she was at. So yeah, you knew something with her was very special.
What's it like to have coached the player that many consider to be the best ever women's volleyball player in U.S. history?
Yeah, her freshman year, she was a small town kid trying to adjust to Lincoln, the big city, and she was still a great player, but she was hard to coach, and that's typical. They all go through that at some point. And then she started, really figuring it out and had a great year, but it was her senior year where she became the leader. And that 2008 team was by far the most highest performing team based on the talent that they had that I ever coached. And it was an amazing team that maxed out the most of any team I ever coached. And Jordan was the leader and the captain, and she took those guys under her wing. And they should make a movie about that season.
A lot changed from 2006 to 2017. So rally scoring goes to 25 points. You move to the Big Ten. Penn State goes on the run where they win 6 of 8. You move to the Devaney Center. First of all, holistically, what was it about that period of time that was so difficult?
So after the 2008 season, I started questioning how much I wanted to coach anymore, because I thought it's never going to get any better in that 2008 season and that team. I said, where do we go from here? We just had this great run, 05, 06, 07, 08. Where's it going to go from here? And we lost, Jordan, and we had all these All-Americans. So, and then I kind of physically just hit the wall and mentally hit the wall. And I woke up one day and I'm like, I don't feel good. Something's not right. So I started going for all these tests and they couldn't figure anything out. They finally sent me to the Mayo Clinic, went through all their tests. At the end of it, they go, you're burned out. It's stress, and you've got to learn how to manage stress. And so the doctor there that kind of was my exit doctor, she said, I want you to check into cognitive behavior therapy. And I said, well, where am I going to do that? What is it? And she says, well, the best person in the United States is actually a professor at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I said, you're kidding me. She says, yeah, her name's Dr. Deborah Hope. And so I got back, went and saw her, and started doing cognitive behavior therapy with her. And I fixed I had anxiety, I had stress. I just, I had to make changes. I gave up coffee, started meditating and doing these things that cognitive behavior therapy teaches you how to control all that. And it worked. It was awesome, amazing. But I realized I had to make that change. And then the other big change I made in 14 was, and again, was I had to continue to build the relationships with players. They needed, again, this coincides with cell phones. And all of a sudden we start seeing players that can't handle failure. And I just realized I had to change as a coach. I couldn't be the old school hard-nosed coach. They just couldn't handle it anymore. And so I had to make that change. And I made that in 13 and 14. And then that's when we started the run in 15.
2013, you make the move. You weren't in favor of it at first. What nudge did you need to finally say, okay?
When they made the announcement that basketball, they're going to build Pinnacle Bank Arena, which was a brilliant plan to build this new arena, and basketballs were going to go there. I get a call from the reporter, like, are you guys going to Devaney? I go, if it's not good enough for basketball, why would we want to go there? So Coach Osborne, he never said anything to me about this, but he was battling with the regents to get money to redo Devaney. I didn't know any of this. Probably 45 minutes after I talked to that reporter, I get a call from his secretary saying, get over here right now. He wants to see you. So I'm thinking, okay. I go over there and I'm walking in. She sees me and she goes, I've never seen him so mad. His veins are popping out. I'm like, what did I do? And then I started figuring out, like, okay, he wants us to go to Devaney. So I get in there and he starts ranting and raving at me. I'm working with I've got these regions set up. We're trying to get this money to update Devaney. And you say this is not good enough for basketball. You're going to ruin everything. And he said, I'm not going to make you go over there, but you should think about it if we do some work. And I said, okay, coach, I understand now. I said, okay, there's 7 things we got to do for us to move over there. So we sat down right there on a piece of paper. I wrote out 7 things because I'd been thinking about it over a couple of years. So we wrote them out, and he goes, okay, we're going to do it. I said, okay, then we'll move. Boom, that was it.
What stands out about the 2015 title? Rolfson twins, Justin Wongerantes, Hunter's leading the way. They've been teammates since high school.
Well, we knew we had a great team, and in 14 we did pretty well, and we ended up knocking off Washington in the semis of the NCAA, and then we ran into a hot BYU team. But so that provided the motivation for that group. But that team was a great team, and we beat Texas 3-0 in the finals. That doesn't happen very often, but they just got it going, and it was a really well-balanced team. They did everything really well.
It was also the year that we started seeing you bring cameras into the locker room post and everybody started seeing how much fun that team was having, and all of a sudden it begins to impact recruiting. I mean, talk about, because that was a culture change for you, how much fun they were having.
Yeah. And part of that, you got to give credit to Kelly. Was a leader of that group. She has fun. She likes to have a good time. She keeps it fun. She keeps it loose. She's the one that told me to stop standing up in matches. She goes, Coach, sit down. We don't need you standing up. You're distraction. I think we won 34 straight matches after I sat down over 2 years. And most of it was over that 15 season.
2017. Hunter's your setter, Fecky at outside, Ani Albright, who you said would never play outside for you, ended up having an all-conference kind of year. Talk about that team.
Tompkins again, and that time a solo block from Annika Albright.
We started off rough. We lost to Northern Iowa. Tyler Hildebrand was my assistant his first year, and I remember told him, he said, we're probably going to get fired after we lost to Northern Iowa. We're walking in the locker room, and I go, we're probably going to get fired. We just lost to, again, Northern Iowa was a great program, but they're, it's not the Big Ten. And we lost some other men. We started off, I think, because Kelly didn't play the first couple matches. So we're like 3 losses in the first couple weeks. But anyway, we just started playing better and better and got better. But got to give Kelly a lot of credit for that. And Michaela Fecky and Kenzie Maloney's, they're great competitors. And so anyway, we get going and we get the tournament and we're playing in the Final Four and the semis and the trip, we're playing Penn State, we're getting beat.
The trip.
It's match point and 2 players trip over each other and the ball falls. And we got it from there, and that's when it felt like this is our destiny, is to win this. And those kids really started believing. And we beat a great Florida team in the final. That was the most fun national. Everybody asked me, what's the best national championship? The 2000 was miserable because it was a no-win, and I just felt miserable. 06 was, we had a really good team, so you kind of have those expectations. 15, we had a great team, but 17 was by far the most fun.
We've heard about the offhanded comment you made, maybe we'll play it at Memorial Stadium. What don't we know about that? What is unique about that, or story hasn't been told, or challenge that you faced trying to put that on? And also, why then at the end was it so emotional?
I think the story is we lost again to Wisconsin. Of all teams, we lose the attendance record, regular season. So how are we going to get it back? And it's just like offhand comment in a meeting with Trev and some other people, like, well, we got to go to Memorial Stadium. And I'm like, yeah, right. I never thought that would happen. And next thing you know, originally they said, oh, we'll just lay the Terraflex over the field. And I go, you guys realize there's a 9-inch crown on the football field? So we're going to have 9-inch, slope going? There's no way. And that's what they thought. And so they had to figure out a way to, how are we going to put a court out there? And they had to build a stage to put it on. But the reason it was so emotional, because it was just an electric night, and nobody had any idea that night was going to turn out like that. Nobody. And you had everything leading up to it. But it was an incredible moment for women's sports. It was an incredible moment for Nebraska Volleyball. I still get chills when I see video of it. It was a surreal night, and it was a proud accomplishment, and we did it in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, who in the world would ever think Lincoln, Nebraska could pull off a world record for a women's event? And, it was a game changer for women's sports.
And
I think there's two things that have impacted women's sports the most: the soccer game way back in the 90s and that volleyball night. And women's sports has been on fire ever since. Just to know to be a part of that makes your coaching career and all that work, because, you know, I don't want to brag about this, but I've been a constant pain in the Big Ten, the Big 12, the NCAA of trying to make women's volleyball better. And I know I've pissed off a lot of people, but I've been with the squeaky wheel, like, why can't we do this? Don't tell us we can't. And I saw a lot of coaches, great coaches, that really never tried to fight for that, but I always felt, and again, I'll go back to Dr. Hibner was my first senior women's administrator. She fought for Nebraska Volleyball and women's sports. She would ask for uniforms. We're going to upgrade the locker. We're going to do this. We're going to raise money so you guys can, you know, charter a trip. And so I always felt like part of my responsibility as the coach at Nebraska was to fight for women's sports. And that was the ultimate moment, was that night.
When I talk to people about you, the first thing they say is competitive. And it's not a normal type of competitive. One person said, a lot of people are competitive, but not everybody go to bed at night thinking about, if I shift the yoga workout 2 hours, will it give my players better chance to recover so that we can be better in other play? Where does that come from? That it's just a constant turning in your mind.
Well, I grew up with my brother was 2 years younger than me. And so we were very competitive. And it was embraced to be competitive in my house, you know, and at the dinner table, and winning and losing was important. And I don't know, I had that in me, and I can remember as a kid crying when I lost, and, you know, can't wait till get another chance. And I've just always been that way. And then when I got into coaching, I was able to probably channel that and try to, you know, instill that in our players, that, you know, we're playing a game where we keep score, and it's a lot more fun to win than it is to lose. And I've always was taking losing really hard. And if we lost, okay, what didn't we do right? What can we do better?
Here we go. One way, move your feet.
In the middle of, you know, your internal turmoil, Nebraska plays its first ever game at the Devaney Center before you move there. And you just happen to play against your daughter at Devaney.
Yeah.
And I'm sure here you are on the bench rooting for Lauren, but rooting for her to lose. What's that like?
Once that match started, we wanted to beat UCLA. I couldn't care less about Lauren, to be honest with you. That was a big match for us. UCLA was a really good team, and she was an unproven setter up to that point. But they played great, and they beat us. But I was also really proud of her as well, because she played a heck of a match, and she willed that team to play great.
After you retired on Kicking It with the Cooks, she said to you, so can I call you Dad now?
Yeah.
And like visibly, you could see you like almost think, well, you always do, but then I think you processed it a little bit. Why did that hit you in that moment?
Well, when she transferred back to Nebraska, we made an agreement. She said, I'm not going to call you Dad, I'm going to call you Coach. We're never going to talk about volleyball. And when I'm with the team, you're the coach, and I'm with the team, and you don't ask me for anything. Don't ask me about this player, that player. And that was our agreement. So she called me Coach for 3 years. And then after that, around people, she would call me Coach. And, you know, even on some of those podcasts, she would call me Coach. So she made it professional. And so that's when, I think when she asked me that, I hadn't thought about it very much. And I'm like, well, yeah, you better call me Dad now.
How did you feel like you did in balancing family life and coaching life?
I feel like I missed out on a lot of things. And, but what I tried to do was, whenever I was home or and I would try to spend any of my free time with my kids. But the tough thing was when they got in high school, like I missed a couple state championships that Lauren won, and I missed some matches, although I did get to go to a couple. It just worked out. But typically, if they're playing in the state championship at Devaney, we're on the road. So, but one of the coolest things, and this is what makes Coach Osborne so special. So Taylor played football at Pius, and I think I saw one or two of his games. Like, you know, they played on a Friday night. I could get to the first quarter before we were playing or something like that. And anyway, his last game, his senior year, we're supposed to be at Iowa State. And Coach Osborne hears about this. He calls me in and he says, I want you to let the coaches take the team to Iowa State and you need to go to your son's football game. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. And he says, nope. He goes, one of my biggest regrets is I missed some of those games. And he says, you need to go. So I did and got to see his final game.
I think by every measure, you've had a blessed life, right? Even at the highest levels in coaching, you have a family that obviously you care deeply for each other because you live so near each other now and you're great friends, you know, after they're adults. I think part of that too, to help create the balance, is you have to have a spouse who buys into it as well. Talk about Wendy's role in, she's never been out front, right? But she's always kind of been the support behind the scenes, but I would imagine was instrumental in some of the decisions you had to make.
Yeah, she's one of the people that I have a lot of respect for her because people do not understand how hard it is to be a coach's wife. And it is tough. And she pretty much the coaches' wives have to raise the kids a lot of the time, especially when we're on recruiting or on the road all the time. So, and she's always been great at giving me advice. She's always right. So I don't know how we could have done it without her and her support.
Talked to another former player, yours, former All-American, who said, wow, I've seen this John Cook over the last 5 to 7 years, and I wish I could have played for that John Cook.
I definitely have went through an evolution. So, and that's one of the reasons I talked to a couple people my age who retired. And one of the themes I kept hearing was, I want to go out on top. I wanted to go out on top. I want to go out the top of my game. And I know since about 2015, I feel like I've been at the top of my game and as a coach. Take out the wins and losses. It's just, I feel like I've done the best job coaching of my career, which, you know, goes 35, 40 years. So that's another reason I thought it was the right time, because I felt really good about where I was at for my craft and how I was coaching. And I didn't want to wait too long where, okay, he needs to get out. It's passing him by, all that stuff. And again, there's lots of ways you can measure that. You can measure on wins and losses. You can how your team plays. But this last year's team was one of the highest level playing teams I've ever coached, maybe the highest. And so, and they were having fun, and they loved volleyball, and they were great representatives of Nebraska, and they were doing all the little things that we asked them to do. They worked really hard. We had the highest GPA ever. So those are all the things that kind of factor in. This was at the top.
Was there the moment where you had clarity?
The moment where it all sunk in was in Ord, Nebraska. I'd gone out there to rope, and then I did a side eval to bring the spring match there. I went to the old people's home. And anyway, when the old man, as I was walking out, he just said, who's going to be the next coach? And I said, well, the AD has to decide that. And he says, it's going to be the Louisville girl. And I left, and I had a 2-hour drive to Atkinson from there. And I just started thinking about it. I spoke up there and I drove to Grand Island and spent the night, got up that morning, and I just felt like it's time. I called Wendy and I told her I'm going to do this. I called Troy and said, Troy, we're going to do it. And there's a song that I've listened to for 30 years from him, and he talks about it's better to burn out than fade out.
The whole cowboy life, everyone wonders, how did this begin? Or I think many people at first thought, okay, this is like when he wanted to take flying lessons, or this is like when he really was getting into golf, or this is like when he went through that biking phase, or like you find something and you go all in, almost obsessive compulsive all in. So when did this cowboy life thing start, and how do you know like this is who you are and not just a phase?
Yeah, you're right. When I do something, but one of the things I learned, back in 2009 and 2010, and Wendy was the one that told me this. She said, you need to find a hobby, because I was so consumed with Nebraska volleyball and just, are we winning? Are we not winning? And it just consumed me. She says, you need to find a hobby. And she was right. So that's when I started flying and started playing golf and got into biking. And so I got into yoga. And so anyway, a few years ago, we built this house up here where you're sitting right now. And Taylor, I think we're sitting somewhere, or we're at an Airbnb while this is being built. And Taylor says, okay, I want to get a motorcycle. And Wendy said, no, you're not getting a motorcycle. And he said, okay, then I want a horse. So we got room up here, I want a horse. And he was working up here at the time. And so I was told I needed to find a horse. Once we had one horse, you just can't have one horse because they get lonely. So we had to get another horse. And then I started roping and became addicted to that.
The cowboy life, do you now become an evangelist and, and preaching to everybody the cowboy life?
Larry, I've gained a lot of respect for the cowboys in Nebraska and their families, how hard they work, their kids. I've just created this appreciation and respect for the western side of Nebraska and the lifestyle that they have. And so I wouldn't know if evangelist is the right word, but it's a appreciation and respect for what they do. And if I have a chance to share with people stories and their life, and I've learned a lot about the cattle industry and the horse industry and the people involved with it. And it's a very connected world. And it's just been fascinating, and I love it, and I love talking about it. Let's give him a cookie. He knows you got one. There you go. Good boy.
Because I love you so much, Rev. I love all of the horses so much.
You do?
All of the horses, every animal in the whole wide world.
Yeah. There we go. Good boy, Rev. Good boy. Okay, hold on right here. Okay. All right, you're doing good, man. Just relax.
How would you define your legacy?
Where are you coming up with these questions? I don't know. In coaching, sometimes you get lucky, and we worked really hard, put everything I could into it, and that's why it's easy to walk away. It's easier to walk away because I know I put everything I had into it, and that's a great feeling. That's why I use the Neil Young song. It's better to burn out than fade out. And I didn't want to fade out, I wanted to burn out. And not that I'm burned out, but there's other things that now have become more important and I want to do, and I don't want to miss out on some things with my grandkids and my family. So I guess just know I gave it everything I had, and we got lucky, and we did some pretty cool stuff, and we took the sport to another level. And Nebraska Volleyball is the pride and joy of Nebraska, and it's the envy of everybody else in this country.
Thank you.